Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's Oppsec back again. And now, the idea of this stream is not to actually do coding on our Mythic C2 agent, but to showcase what it do and how does it work and what is currently capable of. So essentially, I can say the first stable version of the agent. So in that video and this stream, I'm gonna walk through how it works. I'm gonna show you some nice mythic features, and essentially, I hope you're gonna have some nice time, and your day will be a little bit better. Now, I need just a second to make sure that I have the comment section on my next site. So, guys, if you have any questions, just feel free to always ask, and I am happy to help. Okay, so I have recompiled the agent, and now it's live on my mythic instance, which is visible here. So now I'm going to generate a new beacon. And for testing purposes, I have also started my domain controller app here. So I have one SQL machine, a simple firewall, and the DC itself. Don't mind that. That's for another topic, which I'm going to dive into again in future videos. But for now, this is our environment. And from this SQL O1 machine, we're going to actually execute the beacon, try it, see how it works, and essentially showcase what Mythic does in a nutshell. So I'm going to generate a new one. So I'm going to go to payloads, action, generate new payload. From there, I'm going to specify Windows, specify home because that's my agent, click next, and these are all the commands that it has. From here, we need to implement only download and upload, but I'm sure they're not inside here as well, so we should be fine. Yeah. So download is not implemented as well as the upload, but anything else works just perfect. At least in theory. We're gonna see how that goes. On the test, it's my saved preference on how the agent is gonna connect, and we need to make few settings. This is the callback interval, which means it's gonna be easier for me to test, and essentially the callback is gonna come more often than usual. But of course, that's also customizable and it's integrated to the Mythic HTTP profile itself. Now we can also modify the user agent, add different headers, make it more Oppsec, but that's not ideal for now. So I'm gonna click next, create payload, and wait. And it's done. Now what I wanna do is actually I'm gonna close all of my previous testings and debuggings and so on. I'm gonna download a fresh copy of it here. So here I'm gonna just migrate that to my lab. How I'm gonna do that with a simple copy paste, and that's one of the beauties with PowerShell because if you have that, you can just copy paste the script as a command or as a base64 command or in other alternatives, and it's gonna just work. So I'm gonna open PowerShell, and essentially from here I'm gonna just paste my code. Run that. So what the agent is gonna do now is it's gonna first start to obtain details about the machine. This detail may include IP address, host name, integrity level, and all the needed things we like to have. And essentially, if I go back to callbacks, if everything's alright, I should be able to see the callback. And here it is. It's ID 433. And yeah, I've been testing a lot. So if you do help, you can actually see all the available commands it can do beside the download. Sorry, it's not implemented for now, but it's going to be. And we can do a lot of stuff. We can execute whoami, we can execute PowerShell command, we can do operations like printing the current directory or see the running process, import a PowerShell script, do a port scan, and a lot more stuff. So essentially, I want to showcase majority of them. So the first things first, let's do ipconfig to obtain more detailed information about the network configuration, like that, run it. And if you can see, this is not the standard ipconfig command. If you go with, let's go with PowerShell, and I can do ipconfig here, you can see the output is different. Why is different? Because I'm using PowerShell as a agent engine, so the whole agent is based only on PowerShell. And essentially, I wanted to avoid using things that can be indicators of compromise. Because if you run ipconfig, essentially what happens is you end up running ipconfig.exe. So essentially, the command ipconfig is calling ipconfig.exe binary, which is doing that. And essentially, if a process is calling things like who am I, ipconfig, and so on, because you guessed it right, who am I is also a binary. It's who am I.exe. So essentially, if you run or code this kind of binaries, then you can leave indicators of compromise, which can get you detected. So in order to evade that, I'm using native PowerShell syntax in order to get the network configuration of my machine, of the targeted machine, and essentially avoid using binaries like ipconfig. And as you can see, it gives us plenty of enough details about the IPv4 address, the gateway, which is my firewall in the moment, and all of the DNS servers from which we are able to get the domain controllers. Now I know that these are the domain controllers, but essentially we can also understand that by doing further reconnaissance. Who am I is no difference. If I run who am I, see what happens. Again, you don't have the standard who am I.exe, but you have an output which is similar to that. So essentially, you have the domain plus your username, the CID of the username, and all the permissions the user has. So in that case, we can see all the local permissions of this user, and essentially we can see that we are inside the administrators group, which is so nice. And this can be effective into understanding the context of the user, what it can do, and so on. One super nice feature is the port scan. Port scan, if you do help actually, port scan, you can see the details about the command. Port scan is nice because it allows us to scan a specific port just to see if it's reachable or not, just within a PowerShell, and it's using testnet connection function call. So that's how it works. So essentially, I can do port scan, and then you can specify, as mentioned in the usage, either a DNS or an IP address. So let's do a DNS now. So DCO1, eosec.local, and the port, let's be SMB445. Run it. It's going to take a while, and eventually you're going to end up seeing the remote address, the DNS name, the port, and TCP test succeeded equals true, which means that the port is effectively started. Now, I don't think that is, I can say, a huge IOC. I don't think that's something strange, but if you guys think that this call of testnet connection is bad, just let me know so I can use something more Oppsec safe. Okay, now beside that, we can do pwd, see the current working directory. We can also cd somewhere else. So for example, I can do cd one directory above, so I can do pwd. And that's something that I need to fix, but essentially it works. We can also do cd into full paths. So cd Windows tasks like that. Then we can do pwd again, and we can see that we're inside this folder. From there, I can do ls to see the running file, to see the present files. And looks like I don't have any. So I'm going to move into C and users and maybe see the potential usernames on my machine. And there it is. So essentially, this is again, all the things you see here are raw PowerShell syntaxes. So this is eventually GCI at the very bottom. Okay, then let's try PS to see the running process. And there it is. You can see all the handles, you can see all the IDs, you can see the process name, and this can give you nice information about if there's an AV, if there's an EDR, or what other systems might be on that specific system, right? Okay. So one of the cool part about this agent is that you have pretty much two main enemies. The first enemy is obviously the AMZ, and the second enemy is obviously the ETW. So if you manage to escape AMZ and ETW, this agent will be completely fine. Now it has more things that I want to show. And for example, we can use the LDAP query with the query example here. And this query is supposed to give us all the users inside the Active Directory. So let's try to run it. And looks like we have some kind of an LDAP error because it cannot bind to the domain controller. So at the moment, that was one of the, I can say, the demo failures because it worked like half an hour ago. But never mind, I'm gonna try to find a fix for that if I have the time. So for now, we're gonna just skip it. But that's something that I'm going to, for sure, fix in the future as soon as I push the agent code to the GitHub. And on the question where you can find the agent code, you can do so by becoming my patrons. And special thanks to all my patrons, which make this work possible. So this supposed to not supposed to work now, but now it doesn't. So I'm gonna move to something else, and that's capture NTLM. That's super nice feature which allows you to get the current user's NTLM v2 hash or potentially NTLM v1 based on the configurations. So essentially you can do capture NTLM in your web server. So on the Kali, here I'm gonna start a new window and do sudo responder -i ETH0, and I'm gonna start that inside analyze mode because I don't want now to do any kind of spoofing and so on. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna get the IP address like that, or potentially the DNS name for my machine. And what I can do is I can capture NTLM and do HTTP and paste the IP address of my machine. So what that's gonna do, it is gonna request this web server and it's gonna perform NTLM authentication over it, passing its credentials. And if I go back, you can indeed see that I have the IP, I have the username, and the NTLM v1 hash. So from here, I can, of course, relay that hash to somewhere, maybe try to crack it, or attack it using the weaknesses of the NTLM v1. And I think that utility is super nice. Essentially, the PowerShell agent can do more stuff. So what I can do is I can run native PowerShell commands. So if you need to run something specific, which is PowerShell related, you can do so here. So I can do, for example, PowerShell and run, let's run ipconfig.exe, or I can do PowerShell with my.exe, or I can run PowerShell UCI and pass the object and maybe do some kind of a loops. So essentially, if you need the PowerShell console and need to run PowerShell command, you can run so with PWSH command. And one more cool feature about that is you can actually import, now this is the latest feature so far, you can actually import any PowerShell script you want. So for example, I can do PowerShell import and from there specify my file. In that case, I'm going to specify an import overview, which I think all of you knows what it does. But if you don't, this is essentially a nice module which allows us to perform reconnaissance, enumeration, finding attack paths, and it's all using PowerShell and doing a lot of LDAP queries. So task that. It's going to take a while because the file is huge, but eventually we're going to see that import is successful. Now it's imported, but how can you run that? Well, with the same power command. So I can do PowerShell and now use the commandlets from PowerView module. So I can do get domain user, run that, and I get the same error for not finding the DC, which in that case I know how to fix it because in PowerView you can use the option server and specify the IP of your domain controller, which in that case is 172.60.60.50. Run that and see what happens. Boom, we have all the users and we have fully working PowerView inside our beacon. And the coolest part about that is, as mentioned, you can use the PowerShell command as you are in the terminal. So from here, I can, for example, pipeline that and, for example, select some account name. I made a typo. Account. Okay. Yeah, I made a typo again. Sam account name. Okay, run it. So it's gonna get again the users, but we're gonna pipe that and select only the Sam account name, which is gonna give us only the usernames without any other kind of information. So essentially, you can use any PowerShell syntax. I can select objects, I can make loops, and as mentioned, use PowerShell as I have a console on that system, which I think it's super important. One cool feature about Mythic itself is that if you integrate an agent and if you make it to work with Mythic, now it saves you a lot of work because all the commands I do, all the beacons I have, all the files I do, they are stored inside the Mythic database and they can be easily reported and accessible. For example, if I go to the files and then I can go to uploads, from there, you can see the script that I just imported. This is the PowerView.ps1 from my SQL01 machine. We can here see the comment that it was uploaded as a part of tasking. And as mentioned in my previous video, Mythic is highly customizable. So what I can do is I can make another description. For example, this is obfuscated overview, for example, so other operators can see that this is actually obfuscated one. And I can also assign tags. So I can give the tag. So as soon as someone sees the files, they can see, okay, that was used on this host. It's obfuscated. I know what it is. I can use it again. So Mythic is for me, if not the best open source C2 because of its reporting base, because of how it structures the things. And as mentioned before, if you manage to create your own beacon and integrate that inside the Mythic, you have all the benefits of the C2 itself, such as tags, commenting, database, reporting, and essentially the front end itself. So, for example, these are the current capabilities of the agent. And the main idea of the agent is to have three main operations, I can say. The first one is done, which is invoking custom PowerShell modules. So I can now run import and run any PowerShell script I want. Of course, this is going to be tested a lot more in the future since it was developed like about 40 minutes ago. And essentially, the next part is to be able to execute assemblies, so C# code, and last but not least, to execute BOFs. So with my agent, when it gets to the point to execute both PowerShell, BOFs, and assemblies, you can essentially do anything. I'm also planning to integrate a lot of the pre-done PowerShell scripts like PowerView, PowerMat, and so on to the beacon, so you can choose them as commands just like that without needing to import anything else. But with that, you can now import any PowerShell script as you want, run it like you have terminal on your system. And for my next task, I'm gonna do many, many more stuff, but the main idea would be assemblies and BOFs. So that was for today. It was a quick and nice stream because I don't have much time for now. But essentially, I'm gonna continue developing that. I want to thank once again to my patrons for making this thing possible and for supporting my works. If you want to access this Hunt agent, and if you want to get access to my Shadowburn Packer alongside with all the more development videos I have, you can also become my Patreon, support my work, and I can also support you with your journey. Thank you so much. This is now the current state of the beacon. I'm going to continue developing that. And if you have a feature that you want to see inside the hot agent, or if you have any cool idea, just let me know. And I'm going to see you into the next one. Bye bye.